What is up, weather enthusiasts? I'm your host, Pat's Path Predictor. Let's get right into the weather. Alright, so here's the situation we have for you ladies and gentlemen. Tropical storm Debby is rapidly intensifying as it is approaching the Big Bend region of Florida. It is currently west of the Tampa Bay area as it is continuing to organize and strengthen at a very alarming rate as it's making its final approach towards Florida, expected to make landfall and then be a major flash flooding threat for much of the southeastern United States. So we're going to go ahead and pay attention to that, and we're going to go ahead and show you the latest public advisory. Its current location is 27.3 degrees north, 84.4 degrees west. It's going to be its maximum sustained winds have dramatically increased since the stream. At around 1 a.m. when we had the last update, it was at 45 miles per hour. Now we're up to 65 miles per hour. It is moving north-northwest at 13 miles per hour, and its minimum central pressure is 992 millibars. It was, I believe, 1,003 12 hours ago. So now we're down to 992. And I guarantee you that those winds are going to catch up to that pressure because this is a relatively low pressure for a storm of this size. This isn't overall a gigantic storm, kind of like how Alberto was. It's an average-sized storm, and a pressure typically with a 65-mile-per-hour tropical storm would generally be around 998, 997 millibars. We're down to 992, and that's kind of the equivalent pressure of a Category 1 hurricane on average, and I fully expect those winds to catch up to that pressure in the next few hours. It's most likely going to do that tonight, so we'll keep you updated on that as the sun starts to go down and allows for colder cloud tops to form and develop. Here's the latest that we have. We can go ahead and show you the cone. We have hurricane warnings in effect for much of the Big Bend of Florida, hurricane watches for the Apalachicola Bay to north of Tampa Bay. Tropical storm warnings remain in effect for much of the western Florida coast, and we now have tropical storm watches in effect for the coast of Georgia and South Carolina, as this thing is expected to move over there and bring gusty winds and a lot of rainfall over there. So we can go ahead and also show you something else. The tropical storm force winds extend out 140 miles from the center. However, it is easterly lopsided right there, and I do fully expect that to start to slowly wrap around as this thing starts to approach Florida. But the majority of the tropical storm force winds are on its eastern side, so it's a little bit lopsided in that regard. So we're going to have to pay attention to that. But one thing we're continuing to keep an eye on is the rainfall with this. Weather Prediction Center is now calling for a huge area of 12 to 16 inches of rain from the Big Bend of Florida all the way to North Carolina, with 16 to 20 inches expected for Savannah and Charleston. And those two cities right there are going to be in the bulk of this rainfall. So you guys are going to need to pay very close attention to it. Jacksonville is getting 8 to 12 inches of rain. Wilmington's getting 8 to 12 inches of rain. The Tampa Bay area, including Pinellas County, is getting 8 to 12 or 6 to 8 inches of rain still. So we're going to have to keep very close tabs on that. Peak storm surge continues to be at 6 to 10 feet from much of the Big Bend, so we'll have to pay attention to that. It's 5 to 8 feet now from the Swanee River to Yankeetown. It was 4 to 7 feet before. 3 to 5 feet for Tampa Bay and Yankeetown in that area, and 4 to 6 feet for parts of Apalachicola Bay, and 2 to 4 feet of surge is now expected for parts of Georgia and South Carolina. So we're going to have to pay very close attention to that. And we have storm surge warnings all over the place. We can go ahead and show you that right here. We have storm surge warnings from Tampa Bay all the way until the Apalachicola Bay, and storm surge watch is now in effect for the entire Georgia coast and the southern 2/3 of South Carolina, and for Florida. What we're paying attention to is storm surge watch remains in effect for Punta Gorda and the Charlotte Harbor. So we'll have to keep close tabs on that. Regardless, a lot of information is continuing to come in. The flood potential: there is now a high risk of flash flooding for Charleston and Savannah. Remember this: turn around, don't drown. A few inches of rain can lift your vehicle and potentially kill you. So turn around, don't drown, get to higher ground if flash flooding starts to happen, and we'll keep tabs on that, because it has always been my opinion that flooding remains the big risk with this, and this kind of guarantees that, because we now have a day one flood risk for this with a high risk over here. Pretty interesting setup that we're looking at. with this. So yeah, a lot of new stuff has fired up. A lot of new stuff has started. We can go ahead and kind of look at the satellite imagery right now. What we're noticing is there was a little bit of dry air that kind of slowed down the system's intensification a little bit overnight. However, I do not believe that that is going to continue, and this thing still has a good 12 to 18 hours over water. It's moving at 13 miles per hour. And with that calculation right there, I can go ahead and do a quick measurement of that before its landfall period. So basically, it's moving at 13 miles per hour. The center of circulation is about 193 miles away from its landfall point, 180 to 190 miles. So if you do the math, that is about 15 to 16 hours before landfall. So this thing still has plenty of time over very warm water and very weak wind shear to continue to rapidly intensify. So we're going to have to pay very close attention to that. I know I keep saying it like a broken record, but it kind of is true because of everything that's going on. I'm taking a look at the latest satellite as well. There's also another burst of convection firing up near the center of circulation that could help enhance its intensification. There is a few issues, particularly its southwestern side. Over here, that still needs to fill in with convection before it gets to its full potential, and we'll have to keep tabs on it because it's still a very lopsided eastern storm, and that's why the west coast of Florida is getting so many impacts from this and getting so many thunderstorms and all that. And this needs to still have some time to organize. It's still a very rapidly developing situation, but it does look like that hurricane strength is absolutely expected at this current point. The National Hurricane Center, in their discussion, is still calling for a 90-mile-per-hour hurricane at landfall. It could get up to a low-end Category 2. We're not 100% sure with that. Here's what we have going right here. The cyclone is gradually turning to the right, and the initial motion is northwestward or 330 degrees. Over the next day or so, Debby should move through a weakness in the mid-level subtropical ridge over the southeastern U.S. and reach the Gulf Coast on Monday. After the system makes landfall, the steering currents are likely to weaken in the trough over the northeastern United States, moves eastward from the area, which should result in a decrease in forward speed. That right there is why your flash flooding risk is going on, because this thing is essentially going to be stalling over Georgia and South Carolina before moving out into North Carolina. So that's pretty concerning to say the very least. Debby will be moving over very warm waters in a low vertical shear environment prior to landfall. Therefore, significant strengthening is likely through tonight, especially if the cyclone forms a well-defined inner core. The official forecast is near the high side of the objective guidance and calls for the system to become a hurricane within the next 12 hours. The cyclone will weaken after it moves inland, but since the system will not be far from the coastline for the next few days, it is not predicted to fall below tropical storm strength through the next 72 hours. So that's what we're paying attention to in that regard over there. Let's go ahead and show you some of the conditions that we are paying attention to in regards to Debby very quickly, and then we have another story that's been kind of developing since this morning that we're going to go ahead and briefly talk about as well. Let's go ahead and start with the global sea surface temperatures. Where it's at right now is an area of 31 degrees Celsius waters, or about 88 degrees Fahrenheit for those of you living in the United States. You need to pay very close attention to this because it is in some of the hottest waters that the Atlantic has to offer, and it is taking pretty good advantage of it so far. The only thing it doesn't have for rapid intensification, the only thing it doesn't have for an advantage of is time, because this thing is about 15 hours away from landfall at this current point and at this current speed. But I do expect that speed to decrease down to about 10 to 11 miles per hour, which will ultimately allow for this thing to stay over water longer as that ridge starts to collapse and the steering currents start to collapse as well. So global sea surface temperatures absolutely bonkers across this area of the Atlantic Ocean. Very serious situation that we're paying attention to. The ocean heat content where this thing is at, it's not fantastic. It's about, I'd say, 75 OHC right now. The loop current where I was concerned this one might meander to, it did that a little bit earlier last night, and it took some advantage of that. The loop current over here, though, as I'm paying attention to, still has 175 OHC and remains very untapped. So Debby's not really affecting it, and that's concerning for later down the road with hurricane season. But where it's expected to make landfall, it's kind of hard to tell the OHC is because of the continental shelf. So we're not going to really be relying on that as much anymore for Debby. Instead, we're going to be more or less relying on the sea surface temperatures. So ultimately, that's what we're looking at, and that's what we're watching in regards to that. The wind shear where it's at is very low. We're looking at wind shear of around 10 to 15 knots with this system, which could ultimately allow for this thing to rapidly intensify all up until landfall. However, right before it gets to landfall, it is going to encounter a little bit of wind shear that might start to chip away at the structure a little bit. We don't know the true extent of that, but we do know, at least for right now, the wind shear could absolutely, with this angle, help enhance the outflow by quite a significant margin as this thing approaches Florida. But as it starts to move closer and starts to make landfall, then you're going to start seeing a situation where the wind shear might chip at it a bit more, and this thing starts to weaken, not only due to land interaction, but also due to wind shear currents right there. And taking a look at the dry air, yeah, there is a little bit of dry air to the west of it. And there might be some dry air going on just south of the core of the system, but it's clearly not stopping it at this current point. We're at 65 miles per hour. This thing's expected to get up to 90, might get up to 100 miles per hour late into the night, so we're going to have to keep close tabs. But one other thing I am paying attention to, and this is once again a developing situation since this morning, we now have an area of interest east of the Lesser Antilles. A tropical wave is located a few hundred miles to the east of the Windward Islands and continues to produce an area of showers and thunderstorms. And earlier satellite wind data showed winds of 30 to 35 miles per hour just north of the wave axis. Environmental conditions appear generally favorable for some slow development of the system in the next week as the system moves quickly westward at around 20 miles per hour, crossing the Windward Islands by early this week and moving into the central and western Caribbean by the mid to later part this week. 20% chance of formation in the next 7 days, 10% in the next 48 hours, and it has the entire Caribbean Sea tagged as an area of interest. And the NHC has been watching this very closely. We were kind of highlighting it a little bit on stream last night, and this is why, because the NHC has now tagged it. Honestly, it's tagged it a little bit earlier than we were anticipating, so that's another situation. And this also does pose a pretty significant threat down the road, and we can go ahead and show you some conditions to kind of prove that. Let's start with the sea surface temperatures. Where it's at east of the Windward Islands is in an area of about 29 degrees Celsius waters, but that 29 degrees Celsius waters goes down a lot deeper than where Debby is right now. The continental shelf is a lot shallower than the Atlantic Ocean in the main development region. So just wanted to get that out of the way. We're looking at 29 to 30 degrees Celsius of water all the way until we get up to the Yucatan Peninsula and Central America, where the area of interest finally ends. So that's something to keep very close tabs on. And the thing I'm looking at this with is the ocean heat content. I am going to be using the OHC for the Caribbean because this is going to be moving through the best OHC the entire Atlantic has to offer. Where this thing is moving right now, it's in an area of around 75 or so ocean heat OHC. And if we go ahead and show you some satellite imagery, we're going to go ahead and zoom out on this and go ahead and go to the central, about the central Atlantic, just to give you a general gist of it. Convection has absolutely continued to increase down the road. So that's what we're paying attention to. It's moving very fast, approaching the Lesser Antilles, but convection and thunderstorms continue to fire off. And we can go ahead and show you the water vapor imagery, generally in a Sahara dust area just south of there. So it's thriving pretty well so far, and if this thing slows down a few miles per hour, it definitely can organize and develop at a quicker rate than I think a lot of models are anticipating at this current rate, because this thing is going to be moving through a ton of ocean heat content. You're rarely going to see an area below 125 OHC, and you're frequently going to see areas over 150 OHC, which is absolutely something you do not want to see in terms of that, especially with the decreasing wind shear in the region. We can go ahead and show you that. Where this thing is moving into, it has about 10 to 15 knots of wind shear in the eastern part of the Caribbean Sea. That is some very bad news right there. And my thinking right now is this thing is going to start to organize a lot faster than I think a lot of people will anticipate, just based off of these conditions. And I know there is a little bit of dry air just to the north of it, but in the Gulf of Mexico, that dry air decreases substantially compared to where it is right there. Not the Gulf of Mexico, Caribbean Sea. decreases substantially compared to where we were, and I can go ahead and show you that in the Western Atlantic with the situation that we have with the water vapor. Yeah, there is a lot less dry air over here than in the Atlantic Basin, and you're seeing a little bit of dry air to the but the western part of the Caribbean Sea, but where it's immediately at, it's definitely in some good conditions to develop all around because you have very warm water, you have a ton of OHC, you have low wind shear, at least for the eastern half of the Caribbean Sea, and you have more moist air than what we would initially like to see in that part during early August. So things are continuing to really wake up in the tropics right here, and that's why we are covering this, and we will be streaming once again tonight around 9 p.m. Eastern Time to give you the latest on Debby and this new area of interest. Let's go ahead and show you some new track models with Debby and some more intensity models with Debby, and we can go ahead and start with the track right here and right now. The track models want this thing as of 1 p.m. to make landfall, interestingly, in about 18 to 24 hours. So it's indicating some slowing is expected to happen, a lot slower than where it is now. It's only about 190 miles off the coast of the Big Bend, right there. And I can go ahead and do a quick one once again on the radar. So I can go ahead and show you that and pull this up for you. I can go ahead and give you a distance reader based off of what I am seeing with this thing approaching land. So this is the core of the center of the circulation right here, where it's expected to make landfall according to these track models about 180 to 190 miles off the coast. Right now it's moving at 13 miles per hour, so that would ultimately give it a about 14-hour probability if it kept this speed. But the track models want this thing to slow down to about, I'd say according to this, about 8 to 11 miles per hour based on the consensus right here. And considering that the steering currents are starting to collapse as this thing pushes further and further to the north, I can kind of see that. I don't think it's going to stall just yet. I don't think it's going to stall until it gets into the east off the east coast, but it definitely is plausible that this thing is going to slow down that much to about 8 to 11 miles per hour. That's my personal thinking. Intensity models are a little interesting. I know the NHC wants this thing at 90, but the majority of the intensity models want this thing to peak at either a strong tropical storm or a weak hurricane. But considering the fact that this thing is already at 65 miles per hour, it's rapidly intensifying, at least at the rate it's going right now. And we could honestly see a hurricane in the next 6 hours at this current rate. And from then on out, it's house money, determining how strong it gets. And I think tonight is going to be when the most intensification happens, because that's when DMAX starts to increase, that's when the sun goes down, and that's when you see our highest cloud tops. So expect the unexpected, especially as we get into tonight. And especially as we start to see more and more convection starting to fill into that southwestern side of the in that satellite imagery over there. So that's what we're paying attention to. As in terms of this area of interest, we don't have any models on it yet. At least the hurricane models don't have anything. We'll start with the hurricane models on Debby, and then we'll go ahead and get to the new area of interest very briefly. So here's what we have with the H-Wharf right here. The H-Wharf initialized this at 7 a.m. at 1,000 millibars. We were already, I believe it got down to 992 shortly right afterward at 10 a.m. So we're already taking a look at this. So we're going to be, we're going to have to pay attention to this. The H-Wharf wants this to get down to a 979 millibar system as it approaches the Big Bend region. Makes landfall as either a high-end Category 1, low-end Category 2, and then moves through the East Coast and pretty much stalls over Georgia and allows for a ton of flash flooding to happen. So that's the H-Wharf. H-Mon's pretty interesting as well. The H-Mon has this thing organizing and developing further, gets down to about 984 millibars as a hurricane, makes landfall, and starts to stall over Georgia before moving briefly out of the Atlantic Ocean and making landfall in South Carolina. Halves models, let's go ahead and briefly show that. As well, the halves models want this thing to be a Category 1 hurricane. So overall, the consensus is around a mid to upper range Category 1 status, at least according to the 12Z runs right here. So that's kind of what the NHC has kind of been forecasting on. Personally, I think there's a chance it could get up to a Cat 2, but it's going to be very deterministic on what it does tonight as it is approaching shore. So that's what we're paying attention to. Let's go ahead and move to the European model and a few other models that are potentially calling for this an area of interest to organize and develop. in the Caribbean Sea. So let's go ahead and start with that. Here's the European, and we can also show you briefly the ensembles very quickly. I know I want to take another minute to show you this, but here's the European. It's not really showing much for in terms of development, in terms of the operational. However, we're starting to notice is we are starting to see some general agreement with the ensembles, so that's something to pay attention to, and the operational models are going to take some time to catch up, but considering the NHC is tagging this as an area of interest and what we are seeing with Debby right now, they are clearly onto something with this, and we will absolutely keep you updated here on the Pat's Path Predictor channel. Be sure to leave a like and subscribe to the channel if you are new. It helps us out, helps us get more videos out like these. Be sure to join my Patreon. It is in the first link in the description down below. Shout out to Daniel as our official sponsor for the Pat's Path Predictor channel. Without him, we wouldn't be able to produce the quality of content we do. Also, be sure to join the Storms United Discord server. Link to that is right over there. And we will be streaming tonight again at 9 p.m. Eastern Time, 8 p.m. Central Time, so you do not want to miss it. With that being said, have a wonderful day, guys. Stay safe.